"You should have known better than to think you were irreplaceable," my boss said, not even looking up from his laptop. Just like that, 17 years reduced to a careless shrug. My name is Colin Reeves. I'm 52 years old. Until that Thursday morning, I was senior network architect at Vanguard Systems in Raleigh, North Carolina. 17 years of building their entire digital backbone, gone in a 10-minute meeting. I sat there for a moment, studying Alan, my boss of 3 years, the one who always talked about disrupting legacy mindsets while never really understanding how any of it worked. The HR manager, Melissa, was sitting awkwardly to his right, papers already spread in front of her like some grim ceremony. She didn't make eye contact either. "I understand," I said simply, my voice steady. No anger, no protest. I signed the papers, slid them back across the table, stood up and walked out. No one in the office said a word. They just watched me gather my jacket, my thermos, and the small wooden plaque Olivia had made for me when I hit my 15-year anniversary. The backbone of Vanguard. Felt ironic now. As I walked down the hallway, a few junior engineers glanced up. Kids I'd mentored, people who'd once asked for my advice late into project nights. Now they just looked away. Corporate survival instincts kicking in. I left my key card on the security desk and pushed out into the humid North Carolina morning. The door swinging shut behind me with a soft, almost apologetic thud. Standing in the parking lot, staring up at the mirrored windows of the building where I'd spent nearly 2 decades, I felt nothing. No rage, no sadness, just a deep, ringing emptiness. I got in my old Ford F-150, the same one I'd driven for 15 years, and sat there with the engine idling. The familiar smell of coffee and motor oil wrapped around me like a worn jacket. They thought they'd gotten rid of me cleanly. They thought they could wipe me out like clearing a corrupted file. But they'd forgotten something. They'd forgotten who had built their empire of data from scratch. And they had no idea what I kept quietly, carefully, just in case a day like this ever came. I drove home the long way, down winding streets where old oaks bent low over the road, past the corner diner where Andrea and I used to have late breakfast when she was still alive, past the park where I'd taken Olivia for her first shaky bike rides. It wasn't until I pulled in my driveway, the small, sturdy house with the green shutters and peeling mailbox, that the weight of it all pressed down. 17 years. Gone. I sat there, engine ticking as it cooled, listening to cicadas shrill against the heavy afternoon air. Then I killed the ignition, grabbed my thermos, and went inside. The house was still, just like it had been for the last 6 years. No Andrea humming in the kitchen. No Olivia slamming her bedroom door upstairs. Just me and the echo of a life that had moved on. I set the thermos on the counter, shrugged out of my jacket, and went straight to the study. The old desk groaned as I dropped into the chair, a gift from Andrea when I made lead architect. I booted up my personal laptop, waiting for the familiar hum, the flicker of the screen, and then I pulled the small black drive from the bottom drawer. They thought they'd cut me off cleanly. What they didn't realize was that over the years, I quietly built an insurance policy. Not stolen data, nothing illegal, just logs, records, audit trails they'd never bothered to understand or appreciate. Vanguard had grown bloated on its own success. Acquisitions, expansions, mergers, all tied together with a fragile digital spiderweb I had woven and maintained, a spiderweb only I truly understood. And quietly, carefully, I documented everything. Every bypass they authorized to speed up a deal. Every sloppy security exception made to hit quarterly targets. Every backdoor opened and never closed. I didn't gather out of spite. I gathered it because one day I knew someone would come for the quiet man who built the foundation. And now they had. I spent the next few hours organizing, compiling, building the map they never realized existed, a blueprint of every vulnerability, every skeleton tucked into the servers and forgotten. I wasn't planning revenge. No, I was planning something much cleaner, much quieter. I wasn't going to destroy them. I was simply going to show the right people exactly what Vanguard had buried under all that glass and steel and bravado. At 6 p.m., I heated up a can of soup, ate it standing over the sink, then poured a bourbon and sat back down at the desk. There was an emergency board meeting scheduled for Friday. I still had access to the company's public calendars. Perfect. I opened a new email draft. No threats, no anger, just cold clinical truth. Attached a few of the lighter files, enough to make them blink, enough to make them sweat. I addressed it to 2 board members I remember from past audits. People who had once listened, even if they hadn't understood. Subject line: Vanguard Systems. Immediate risk disclosure. Priority urgent. My hands didn't shake as I clicked send. Not even a little. When I shut the laptop, the house was already growing dark around me, the windows lit only by the purple smudge of the setting sun. I sat there for a long time, sipping bourbon, staring at the faint outline of Andrea's favorite rocking chair in the corner, wondering what she'd say. Probably something simple, something steady. You did what you had to do, Colin. You always do. I nodded to the empty room. Yeah, I always do. And I wasn't finished yet. Tomorrow would be interesting. Morning came slow. Gray light filtered through the blinds, pale and heavy with rain. The kind of day where the air feels thick, like it's waiting for something to break. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee, scrolling through the news on my phone. But my mind wasn't really on it. I was listening, waiting. At 8:42 a.m., my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring out. 2 minutes later, another, then another. Emails started trickling in from the corporate server addresses. First polite, then a little sharper, then unmistakably urgent. The board had got my package, and they weren't happy. Good. I finished my coffee slowly, then moved to the study, booting up my laptop again. By now, access to my Word account should have been revoked, but I still had one overlooked door open, an old admin credential buried deep in the infrastructure, one they never bothered to sunset properly. Typical. I logged into the monitoring system, not to sabotage, not to steal, just to watch, like a man at the edge of a burning forest, studying the way the flames crawled and caught, emails flying back and forth between executives, system queries spiking, audit logs spinning into overdrive. They were scrambling, trying to figure out just how much I knew, and the truth was far more than they ever imagined. By noon, I knew the board had called an emergency session. The CFO's calendar went from lunch with investors to executive meeting mandatory. The CTO, who'd once joked that I was practically furniture, had canceled his whole afternoon. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers under my chin. This wasn't about revenge. It never was. It was about truth. It was about respect. It was about making sure that no one else spent 17 years building something, only to be tossed aside like yesterday's tech. Around 1 p.m., there was a knock at my front door. Not the aggressive pounding of a threat, but the polite, hesitant tap of someone who knew they were trespassing. I stood at the window, careful to stay out of sight, and peeked through the blinds. Vanessa, HR, and standing behind her, arms crossed over his expensive suit, was Jason Klein, the new blood consultant they brought in 6 months ago. I didn't move, didn't open the door, let them stand there, let them wonder. After a few minutes, they left. A folded envelope was tucked into the crack of my door. I waited until their car pulled away before retrieving it. Inside, a formal letter. Offer me a transition assistance package, 5-month severance, health coverage extension, and a strict non-disclosure agreement. I smiled, a bitter curve in my mouth. They still thought this was about money. They still didn't get it. I fed the letter into the shredder, one slow, grinding inch at a time. That night, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Adam Fisher, a former Vanguard employee who'd left after a quiet scandal that never quite made the news. He'd picked up on the second ring. Colin. His voice was wary. It's time, I said simply. A long pause. Thought you might call someday, he said. You ready to blow it wide open? I thought about Andrea's rocking chair, about Olivia's college tuition, about all the weekends I'd worked, the birthdays I'd missed, the loyalty I'd given. No, I said, I'm ready to build something better. Adam chuckled low in his throat. I'm in. We talked logistics. Strategy. The bones of something new. Not just tearing down Vanguard's rotten empire, but creating a place that respected the people who actually built it. When I finally hung up, it was past midnight. The rain had stopped. The clouds had broken open to reveal a sky full of hard, cold stars. I stood on the porch for a long time, feeling the chill settle into my bones. Feeling something else too? Something steadier than anger. Purpose. They thought they ended me. They had no idea. I was just getting started. Thursday morning came with a different kind of weight. Not dread, not anger. Something sharper, cleaner, like the edge of a blade freshly honed. I dressed carefully. Simple slacks, crisp shirt, no tie. I wasn't dressing for war. I was dressing for clarity. At exactly 9 a.m., I sent the second package, the one I'd spent months preparing, just in case. It went not only to the Vanguard board, but also to the company's primary investors, the Department of Labor's regional office, and 2 business journalists I'd once helped quietly during an old data breach no one ever heard about. The email subject line was simple: pattern of malfeasance, a detailed audit trail. Inside, payment structures, dummy vendors, inflated invoices, proof of retaliation against internal whistleblowers, names, dates, receipts. I didn't accuse. I simply presented, like laying evidence before a jury and letting them reach the only possible conclusion. Then I closed my laptop and waited. Andrea found me out on the back patio, rocking slowly in the chair she'd re-stained just last fall. She handed me a glass of iced tea, her face curious. You ready for the world to tilt? She asked softly. I smiled at her, a real smile this time. It was already tilted, I said. I'm just nudging it upright. Around 11:15 a.m., the first call came in. Unknown number. I let it ring out. By noon, a flurry of calls, texts, and emails battered my phone. Corporate numbers. Personal numbers I recognized. Frantic young engineers. Block numbers too. Somewhere around 1 p.m., Stephen, the young kid who'd quietly looked up to me, sent a single message. They're in full lockdown. HR evacuated 3 execs. You lit a fuse, Colin. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. This wasn't a fire to extinguish. This was a cleansing burn. At 2:37 p.m., the news broke publicly. Vanguard Industries under federal investigation for financial misconduct. No names yet. No finger-pointing. Not yet. But it was coming. By 3 o'clock, the stock price had started its slow, inevitable slide. I watched the news feed like a man at the beach watching the tide roll out before tsunami. Still calm. Still silent. Still certain. At 5:12 p.m., an email landed in my inbox from a law firm downtown, representing interested parties, seeking an urgent conversation. Translation: the board was panicking. They wanted to negotiate. They wanted to contain the damage. They wanted to understand. I stood at the kitchen sink, looking out at the backyard where Andrea had planted tomatoes in neat, stubborn rows. Understand what? That loyalty cuts both ways? That people are not disposable? That trust, once shattered, can't simply be stapled back together with a fatter paycheck or a new title. I rinsed my glass and let the email sit unanswered. I had my own plans now. That night, I met Adam and 2 other former Vanguard employees at a quiet diner on the edge of town. People like me. People who'd seen the rot and been discarded when they no longer fit the new, glossy image. We didn't talk about revenge. We talked about building, infrastructure consulting, cybersecurity for mid-sized businesses, ethical tech leadership, all the things Vanguard had once promised, but abandoned the chase for quarterly bonuses. We sketched rough ideas onto napkins, onto the backs of receipts. We laughed. The kind of real, belly-deep laughter I hadn't felt in years. Freedom wasn't a number in a bank account. It was sitting in a cracked vinyl booth, surrounded by people who remembered your name, not just your employee ID. By the time I got home, the first public statement from Vanguard had dropped. We take these allegations seriously and are conducting an internal review. Translation: they're guilty and buying time. Andrea was waiting up for me. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. I raised an eyebrow. "Open it," she said. Inside was a key. Heavy, old-fashioned. "Garage," she said simply. "Go look." Confused, I walked out to the detached garage and lifted the door. Inside, parked carefully under a sheet, was a car. Not a new car. An old, lovingly restored 1967 Ford Mustang. Midnight blue, chrome trim glinting in the porch light. My dream car, the one I'd talked about restoring someday for 20 years. Tears stung the back of my throat. "I figured," Andrea said in the doorway, voice soft. "You finally have time now." I turned to her, words sticking somewhere between my heart and my mouth. Finally, I just nodded, and she understood. She always had. The next morning, I woke up early, earlier than I had in months. No alarm, no calendar alerts, just sunlight seeping through the curtains and the weight of choice pressing not heavily, but warmly on my chest. I brewed coffee, black, strong, poured it into the battered thermos I'd used for nearly 2 decades. Andrea was still sleeping when I slipped out the garage. The Mustang waited, gleaming like a promise. I ran my fingers along the cool metal, the fender, the door handle, the long, proud hood. Then I slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and let the engine rumble to life. It wasn't just noise. It was a heartbeat, a beginning. I drove with no destination in mind, through the edges of Columbus, down past a river, through neighborhoods that still felt familiar even after all these years. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rear-view mirror. Not the worn-down IT guy they'd underestimated. Not the invisible man who worked behind the scenes while others took credit. Just Colin Ward, a man who'd lost his job and found his worth. At a diner off Route 62, I pulled in and ordered pancakes I didn't need and coffee I didn't really want. Across the room, a boy, maybe 16, maybe 17, was typing furiously on a laptop covered in stickers. College logos. Coding boot camps. I smiled to myself. Maybe he was building something right now. Something no one around him understood yet. Maybe one day they'd laugh at him too, until they wouldn't. I paid my bill, left a tip bigger than necessary, and walked out into the crisp morning air. No emails, no corporate drama, no heavy badge clipped to my belt. Just sky overhead and open road ahead. When I got back home, Andrea was sitting on the porch steps, mug of tea in hand, her hair tangled from sleep. She smiled up at me. "You look lighter," she said. I sat down beside her, still holding the car keys loosely in one hand. "I am," I said. I told her about the drive, about the boy with the laptop, about the way the world felt wide open again. She listened the way she always did, not rushing, not filling in the silence, just letting it be. "You know," she said finally, "not everyone gets to burn down their old life and start over." I looked out at the street, at the neighborhood waking up. "I didn't burn anything," I said softly. "They did." I just walked away. We sat there a long time, the morning warming around us, the day unfolding like a gift. Later, when I checked my phone, there were 6 messages waiting. Recruiters, board members, even a tentative offer from a rival company, promising better pay, better title, better everything. I smiled, turned off the phone, tossed it onto the kitchen counter, without answering a single one. Outside, the Mustang glinted in the sun. I had a different project now. Something real, something mine. No systems to patch, no executives to placate, no battles to fight. Just a man, a car, and a wide, endless road. I wasn't starting over. I was finally starting right. And this time, no one else would hold the map.